Well, let's go. Come on. There it goes. All right. We are live. Hello, hello, and happy Thursday, July 8th. We are in the second half of 2021 already. I cannot believe it. This is crazy.
Where did it go?
I don't know. It's like everyone was wishing for 2020, and then 2020 came and flew by. And of course, we know what happened with 2020. And now we are already halfway through 2021. Hello, everyone. My name is Leslie Gaudette. I am a coach. I help mainly women. I work with my clients around, I really decided I wanted to really hone in on a place where I thought it would be really interesting to talk about. And it's what I basically do is I help my clients push through their fears by taking that deeper dive into their mindset and their beliefs so they can make better decisions in their responses to their emotional triggers, which will help promote healthier relationships with themselves and with others. And on top of that, I wanted to give you just a little bit more context about me. And so on top of that, when my clients learn to understand that fear, here's going to be a real weird thing for you to put your mind around, but fear is just another word for curiosity. And that's when you start learning how to step outside of your comfort zone and start asking really important questions like, what do I believe? Is it true? And does it have to be true? How can I learn from this experience, change my belief around it so it's for my benefit to empower me? And then finally, the supporting evidence. What do I need to help me move through my limiting belief into more empowering one? So I just wanted to share that today because I felt like give you a little bit of a bigger idea of what it is that I do with my clients. So, Andy.
It's wonderful that you said that because I've actually been mulling over a concept over the past couple of weeks myself in my coaching business, in the coaching part of this. Now, of course, we're not trying to tell you guys all to come and, hire us as coaches. We just wanted to give you a bit of a flavor of who we are and where we come from and kind of where these conversations come from. So again, like I said, it's interesting that you said that because I help guys with control issues, whether they don't have control of their lives or they're controlling other people in their lives or there's some version of a control issue in their lives. And what I've been mulling over lately, what I've been really considering lately is a lot of guys have a lack of control in their life and they have other people telling them what they're supposed to do, what they should do, what they have to do. You need this, you need that. And what I'm discovering is that a lot of guys believe they can't do those things they're told they need to do, and they feel like they have no choices. As a matter of fact, some of them feel like the only choice they have is death, which gets deep real quick, right? And what I've been discovering lately is I'm building a program for guys who don't feel like they have any choices. Like they don't have choice in what they're doing, whether they're an addict or they have anger issues or they have, some sort of major thing going on in their life that they don't feel they have any control over. I'm helping them find ways that they do have choices. And I'm talking about like little ways. Like, for example, the addict who's going to just, he's going to do his addiction, whatever that is, and he's going to do it no matter what happens, rather than being told that he shouldn't. I want to help him figure out how he can do so and minimize the collateral damage around him. So, if I'm going to, I don't know, shoot up some meth or something like that, then maybe use a clean needle, or make sure that when I'm doing so, I'm in a safe place, or I'm around safe people, or, give him the choices that he can choose. Because a lot of those guys don't figure they can choose to stop whatever their addiction is. And they don't figure they can be around people who are judging them and telling them what to do. They don't figure they have much choices. They don't believe they have a lot of choices. So I'm trying to build a program to help these guys see the choices they really have, because some of them are really tiny. Like an alcoholic who knows he's going to drink and probably throw up. The choice could be, do you want to have a bucket nearby or not? Right? Just make sure you got something nearby. So this is a new concept I'm talking about, a new program I'm building to help guys in desperate situations see the choices they do actually have, rather than helping them see the choices they don't have or don't believe they have. So it's interesting that you're going about refining who you're helping and how you're exactly what it is you're doing, because it's neat, because in this week I've been doing very much the same thing with the guys that I help. So how's that for an opening to the conversation, folks? I can't hear you for some reason. Hang on a second. What's going on here? I can see your lips moving. What's going on? I could hear you when we started. I don't know what the hell. What's going on?
I'm unplugging this. For whatever reason, it wasn't working. So I'm unplugging it.
Yes.
All right. So yeah, it's interesting for us to start off this way, but I always feel like sometimes we have to insert that information so people can get an idea of who we are and who we help. Again, this channel is not for us to say, hey, come work with us. However, we want you to know who we are, not only as people as we're discussing these interesting topics that we've been coming up with, but also to let you know that we do have working practices. We are coaches. We do help people, and this is what we do around that. And so I love that we were able to do that today. I wanted to be able to share that. So these conversations come from our experiences, not just our own personal experiences and our personal lives, but around the people we help. They come from the questions our clients ask. They come from the questions that people ask us because we're coaches, whether they're clients or not. They come from the conversations we do have. I just figured out the problem. All right, live.
This is what we do. Now you're muted. There we go. No, still can't hear you. Oh, there we go. What have you got?
Yeah, I had this turned off.
Technology is a wonderful thing.
Yes, it is.
I can't tell you how many videos I've had to re-record because I was muted the whole time.
Yeah. And they were good too, right?
They were my best videos ever.
So tonight we want to talk to you about something a little different. I have to tell you, I am a little bit outside of my comfort zone with this topic. I'm not sure how comfortable I'm going to feel. And the reason why I say that is this is who I am as a person. So aside from being Coach Leslie, I've never been the girl that follows trends, whether they're social or fads. Meaning I do this at my own pace. So if something's in season, it's a trend that's happening right now. If I'm not digging it right now, it's not going to be part of my life right now. So I take my time. It's in fact, I'll give you an example of one it took me many years for me to actually come around, was microwaves. It took me years before I even used a microwave. Yes. I just wasn't certain that they were safe. And because, microwaving your food just gave me that weird feeling. And so I've never really been one, even like with clothing, like there would be trends, different clothing trends, or as people would maybe say, even like different foods where there were the diet trends, the diet fads. The only thing I think I could really even have any kind of saying that it was something I did follow was the yo-yo diet, because I was up and down with my weight and everything, because I was like, I was very conscious of that. So, but other than that, trends, fads, things like that, I never really was one that followed those. Like I wasn't the one that would jump on and say, oh, definitely I want to do that right now. I wasn't like that. And so this is going to be an interesting conversation for me. I don't know how you feel about it.
Yeah, I think that's relevant because I believe that a lot of people who would watch the kinds of videos you and I make on this channel would relate to that. That a lot of people wouldn't, a lot of the people that we would relate to or that would relate to us and our content would be in the same boat. They don't follow fads, and trends. They don't jump on the newest bandwagon. And most of us are still influenced by those, whether we jump on the bandwagon or not,
Mm-hmm.
because they influence our marketing and they influence how other people talk to us and to each other. And it's often we have family members or friends who do jump onto those fads and those trends. I'll get those words right eventually.
Okay.
And because I'm in the same way. See, so I'm a little bit different in that I didn't follow the trends and the fads, but I really wanted to. I was just so socially awkward. I didn't know how, right? I just didn't really get how to jump on them. And by the time I did, they were way not cool anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I was that kid that would jump on a trend, 10 years before it was cool or 10 years after it was cool, but not during the time that it was cool.
Oh, okay.
So, so I would often be ostracized or judged because of those kinds of things. Right. So I think it is relevant that because you haven't followed these trends or jumped on these bandwagons the way that many other people have, it's still a relevant conversation because those things do influence our society. And that's kind of where I wanted to, direct the conversation a little bit, is how do these things change our culture? Because I believe our culture is actually comes from most of these trends. Back in our history, there was, it was the trend to, wear cowboy hats, or ride around on horses and carriages, right? And if you didn't have a horse, then you couldn't go anywhere, do anything. But was that a trend or was that a life necessity, right? Or, and there's a trend to honor certain parts of history. There's certain things in our history that we honor, and often those are dictated by current events. Things that are coming up in the media right now become a trend or a fashion. An example is last spring, over and above COVID, there was the George Floyd event, and then it became a trend to talk about racism. And it became a trend to talk about the division in America and to a lesser degree also in Canada. It became a trend to talk about all these divisive topics and to bring those things up. So that has, over the past 12 months at least, influenced our culture. Our culture has changed in North America because of that event and the conversations that came from it. Those are what I'm talking about when I talk about trends, and fads are. We'll get into those a little bit later too, but they also influence our culture. I think our culture is made up of those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think the trends though that when you were talking about like the ones that bring up social awareness around different events, I think those are important things. So yes. It might be a trend, but I don't know necessarily if I would put that as a trend because I think it's a necessity. I think those conversations are necessary because there's been so many conversations where people are saying that those things are not a reality when in fact they are. So, and here in Canada too, we're having the whole issue around the Indigenous people, and it's been a trend, if you want to use the word trend, to out of sight, out of mind, to not even have conversations with them, or to me, it's like a very unusual thing when I don't see any people out and about when I go walking, when I go to the grocery store. It's very rare. I know some that are here, but I think I really don't know. And that would be I would love to entertain that conversation with somebody who actually is, from an Indigenous culture, who actually is living that lifestyle, who is maybe feeling like they don't matter, that they are actually the forgotten and invisible people. Right. But those things, I don't necessarily know if I would put them under a trend, because that could then be taken as a negative connotation towards it. However, I do think there are some things that are conversations that become trend-like, like I can't, off the top of my head, I was just thinking of something and it just kind of escapes me. But it's just like, for example, the way people would speak a certain way. You know, I don't know if it came from rapping or if it was influenced by rapping, but there was a whole different type of language that was created and they actually started recognizing it. I think they called it Ebonics. I'm not really 100% sure. However, that became trended for a while. That was, so stuff like that, I would say is more what I would think would become a trend. But I mean, I understand what you were saying as far as like once something happens, social things happen, that conversations start and they don't, and they evolve. But I think just as a, I don't know if that would be where I would place something like that under that heading. But see, people, we actually can have disagreements too, by the way. Real life conversation. We're having a conversation because, see, this is what this is about. This conversation is about not just for us agreeing with each other, because I mean, a lot of the time we do, because we have a lot of similar values, but we also allow each other's opinions to be that which is our opinion, our thought process, and we have honest conversations. That's what this is about.
That's exactly what this is about. And back to the point of trends, I call those, I would classify those under a trend because there's a significant portion of the population that wants to deny that they exist, and therefore they would identify them as trends, and they would identify them, it's the new cool thing to talk about this stuff. And therefore they would, they would recognize that that's just how our society has evolved these days, right? So that's what I mean when I say a trend. I mean something that not everybody in our society has bought into or has decided to follow. And the racial discussions is definitely something that is divisive, in that there's a significant portion of the population that doesn't follow it and a significant portion of the population that thinks it's very, very important. You and I both think the racial conversations, all versions of racial conversations, are important. And I wanted to recognize that there are some people who don't.
Yeah.
And those people would definitely call it a trend. It's the new cool thing to talk about racism. Well, no, actually it's not. It's always been important. But so that's where I was going with that conversation. And again, it's not to convince you that what I say is right. Like, that's not the point, right? It's to tell you where I'm coming from, and you can have your opinion. I can have my opinion. It's about differenting. It's about having different opinions and different thoughts, and still being in the conversation. Like, that's the whole point here. That's I think for myself, that was one of the biggest ulterior motives for wanting to have these conversations, for you and I to build this channel, is so that we could have conversations that didn't come from the same perspective in every conversation. Like you said, lots of things we agree on. Partly because we're coaches, and eventually coaches do evolve to some similar values, and partly because we also had similar values growing up. Not the same, but similar, and therefore there are some differences. More trends that I would say would be like things that happen on social media. It was cool to be on Facebook. Now it's cool to be on Instagram, or then it's cool to be on Twitter, or then it's cool, like wherever the in thing is. The newest one, as you've mentioned a couple of times, is what's that social media channel you're on now? Clubhouse. You can clearly tell I'm not on that one yet.
Yeah. And and it's true, because where is it, social media is the way. Obviously, you got the LinkedIn, you've got Instagram, you've got Twitter, you've got Clubhouse, you've got Facebook, and all of these are. I mean, I think Facebook obviously was the first to really like start conversations for connection. But I think the one thing that I'm finding with Clubhouse, and I'm not saying it's a bad platform, but it is one that it takes some commitment. And so is it a trend? Is it a fad? We don't know, because it's trending now with everybody. People who are iPhone users had been on it a year, and then they opened it up to Android users. So Android users have been opened up since May. So that gives you an idea. So it was trending for a year with the iPhone, and then they got it working for Android. As I've been going through this platform myself, I've noticed that it is a huge time commitment, because you have to decide how much you're going to show up. Is it every day? Is it once a week? Is it once a month? I mean, twice a month? What does that look like for you? And if you want to grow your group, so this is another thing with respect to having a trend that takes a lot of commitment, a lot of your time, is how fast do you want to grow your presence on there? Because you don't see your face except what you have as your profile picture. You don't have a face-to-face like this when we have conversations. So you have these rooms where you're an anonymous person with a picture, and you can say what you say, and you can just peace out after you've had your say. And so how it can be hard, I think, because it's been trending for over a year now, and now there's millions of people on there. It's a lot of time. It takes a lot of time, and again, it's how is this platform going to continue to evolve, or are people going to fall off? Are they going to find it's just too time consuming? Because there are people on there who've got thousands of followers. They have a big group of, they call them clubs. And I have started a club. I have three members, myself included. And then trying to get the consistency of getting people to come to your rooms. People are in the hallway. They call it the hallway, and you can scroll through and see if that interests you. How do you get them interested? It's your title, because then they'll at least pop in to listen for a minute. If it interests them, they'll stay. If it doesn't, they won't. And so again, it's another trending social platform. I don't know. You've got another trend, which is the Instagram Reels. I haven't jumped onto that. I don't know. I'm just those types of things. Again, I wanted to be on Clubhouse. Not sure. I've got this month to try it out to see what I think.
Right.
For my and again, this is probably the first time I actually wanted to be in something this quick, because I've never really been one to jump on the bandwagon. Right. Just like with Instagram and the Reels and all that stuff, the stories. Right. Yeah. I just do it at my pace.
Right. And that's kind of where I wanted to bring that conversation is I'm glad that you told us your experiences with Clubhouse. Mm-hmm. Because that in the wider conversation of trends and fads, a trend is something that people jump onto, and then as the wave kind of peels off, people stick around, and then you get your kind of core group of people who use whatever that trend is. Whereas a fad fades away. Yeah. Where the masses don't even remember that it was there. It might still exist, but it would have like almost what you might call a cult following, where it's a small group of very strong loyalists. Mm-hmm. So that's why I wanted to bring up Clubhouse, because as we record this conversation, it is very much in that stage of is it a fad? Is it a trend? Is it something that's going to stick around? Is it something that's going to go away? And your experiences actually spoke very much to that. You don't know, but your experience spoke very much to that. Will it stick around? Will it stay? Will it fade away? And the other part of that conversation is fads and trends, whether they stick around because they're a trend, or whether they were just here for a bit and gone again, like a fad is. They do influence our culture. Because of Clubhouse, a lot of the other social media channels now have rooms, places you can hang out and do similar to what you can do in Clubhouse. Yeah. So Clubhouse has changed our world, at least our social media world, just by existing. Even if it is just a fad and goes away, what it has done to the world will stay forever, because that mark has been made. And I believe that's probably the difference between a trend and a fad. If I were to look at it, is that a trend makes a mark in the world, and even though it might slow down its own popularity, it has made a mark in the world, and because of that mark, it will stick around. Like that's my belief.
Yeah.
And again, that's kind of where I wanted to go with this conversation is no matter what fad, like I don't care if you're talking about bell bottom jeans or if you're talking about, you know, the popularity of coloring our hair, you know, funky colors like orange and purple and green. I don't. It doesn't matter which fads and trends you're talking about. Those things do influence our society. You know, the language you're talking about that came maybe from the rap culture or maybe from some other, you know, derivative. I would have called that street speak, and street speak has been around for forever. There are people who hang out in the urban areas and they just speak a different language than people who are from the more rural or suburban areas. They just have a different kind of way of speaking to each other. They have a slang and a lingo, and whether that comes from the rap culture, whether that comes from farmers or some other culture, they do have a different lingo, right? And again, that is more versions of trends and fads and the culture evolving with them. You know, that bleeds then into our music and our media, and it changes the way people speak. Like, how many people don't use the word like I just did probably 30 times. And that came from a trend. That came from a trend back in, I don't know if it was the 80s or the 90s, but it came from a trend from a while ago. And it has managed to stick around, right? So that's kind of where I wanted to take the conversation, whether or not they are fads or whether or not they're trends or whether or not they're cultural issues or what we actually call them is less important, and more important to the conversation, I believe, is that our culture is not created because somebody says this thing is right and we're going to keep it. It's because something comes by, somebody invents a thing or starts a thing or creates an idea or a thought or says a few sentences. Somebody else picks it up and somebody else picks it up, and whether or not it's, you know, a few thousand people that pick it up and it vanishes in a week or two, or whether it's, you know, a few million people pick it up and they keep it for a few decades. How long it's here doesn't matter because they all influence our culture. And it's not because of somebody said this is right or this is the way it's got to be. It's just because they became popular for a while, and that popularity influenced our culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. It's like anything, no matter what it is, it just comes around. Some few people or a lot of people like it. They adopt it as their own. And then maybe over time it just kind of fades away, but it still had an impact. Example is the smiley face has become an emoji now. Before, I mean, people used to have things like that on those, what kind of, remember when they would have the colors, like they would be, I don't know, is it mushed together, but I forget what it's called, and psychedelic colors on your t-shirts and things like that. Tie-dye. And from tie-dye, you saw people getting those happy faces on their t-shirts and sayings on their t-shirts, and then all of a sudden those things now are in our social media, like on our Facebook. You can do emojis, all different types of emojis now, and sayings, and now you've got avatars that you can use in your social media. So those are trends, right? And those have stuck around, and that's the same for like with just these platforms that we use for social media, whether it's Instagram or Facebook. Of course, you've got then those Snapchat, I think, is another one. Ones that I never really, and again, I think it could just be generational because I'm an older woman. So it could be just generational. The younger people tend to now be the ones who are experimenting with these new trends that come out. And they're in a way helping the decision whether or not it sticks around and influences for a while at least. Like the Instagram reels. People are using reels now, and people are saying use reels in your business. And again, it comes down to comfortability, and it comes down to, like, you know, does this really fit for me? And so I love the fact that it's not about this is right or this is wrong. I like the fact that with a trend, you can decide. However, I do believe also that people can be influenced by their peers when it comes to specific trends that come out. The way you dress, like the preppy look. If you
Yeah.
can you imagine? Because I can just see, for example, there's those movies, 16 Candles. There was another one with Molly Ringwald, I should say. But just around that time, those different movies where they dressed a specific way. It was very preppy, and everybody dressed that way. Everybody in their circle dressed that way. And so in this movie, oh, I just forget it. It's with Molly Ringwald, but it's the one where she's in the school and the preppy guy, likes her, but she dresses really quirky. She makes all her own clothes.
Yeah.
And I can't quite, if somebody's watching, put the name of the movie in there for me, please. But anyhow,
Help a girl out.
Yes, help the girl out. Anyhow, the moral of the story is she dressed completely different, quirky, but he liked her. And it wasn't about her, the way she dressed, or that she didn't come from money. But there's that whole, he was influenced for a while in the movie by his friends because she has no money. She dresses different. And people, when they saw them together, had something to say. So I think it definitely, even if it's a fad or it's a trend, could be in a circle of friends or just like a community where it becomes, it does get adopted, and you look different or you're seen as an outsider if you don't adopt this trend. So I definitely think it can be, influential to, influenced by your peers with respect to a trend. So how does someone like really get through that, right? Because again, are you a follower where I know I'm not, and it never bothered me if I missed out on something. If I decided I liked it 2-3 years from now and I decided I was going to wear it, I was going to wear it. If it was a piece of clothing or shoes, or if I liked it, it was mine. I didn't care about trends. I didn't care if anyone had anything to say about it. So I'm just curious, like, what do you think about that?
It's interesting because, as I shared earlier, I would follow trends before and after they were cool. And oftentimes I found it difficult to follow trends afterwards, because if you ever try to follow whatever the newest fashion was 10 years afterwards, you're not going to be able to find most of that stuff in the common stores anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to be able to just go shopping for it. Like even Walmart and stuff doesn't carry it anymore. Like the trends are difficult. And then that's where the stigma comes in, because often the only place you can find those trends is in the secondhand stores, the thrift shops, and then you get a reputation for shopping in the thrift shops, right, and for wearing the old clothes, and again, that all influences how we feel about ourselves, and especially as we're younger people. Younger people are more influenced by their peers, generally speaking. Not all younger people, but generally speaking, and therefore it is more of an identity, a cultural influencing thing. Like it does really define who we want to be as we grow up, right? I remember the first identity I chose, being a headbanger. I mean, that's why I grew my hair out, was to become a headbanger. When I was, 18, 19 years old, that was the first identity I chose. And the headbangers that ran around school, they either wore leather jackets or the poorer ones wore jean jackets. And I was a jean jacket kid. And eventually I did get a leather jacket and wore it for years and years. And so the identity, the trend there was to, even the trend of what that meant, the trend of what a headbanger is, or that's definitely an easy 80s word. Like that's definitely something. Anytime somebody hears that, they think of the 80s kids with their, long hair and swinging their heads around and all that sort of stuff, right? And lots of us did it. Hell, I did it into the 90s and 2000s. So, Again, much after it was cool. But the idea, right. That's exactly it. And here's the thing, though, and that still influences our society. A lot of what come from past decades, like every radio station has a decade of this music. I don't care if you're jazz or contemporary or old school big band or even orchestra music. They all have decades. They all have decades of, oh, this is the specialties from this decade, whether it's the 20s and 30s and 40s, or whether it's the 80s and 90s and 2000s. They've all got, so that there are flavors of music. There are flavors of movies. There are flavors of media. And all of these things were trends that we just jumped onto the bandwagon of, that enough people liked, so they started putting it into our media. And oftentimes, media creates that. One of the newest things that I've discovered recently is something called hip hop. It's essentially a mixture of country and rap. And most of these guys aren't making a lot of money. They don't have big audiences because it's still a brand new trend, right? And they're just as pointed and abrasive as old school rappers were from the 90s. And so, these are the trends, and they do influence our culture. They change what America or what Canada becomes over the course of time, right? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of why I wanted to have this conversation. Why I'm glad we're having this conversation is because a lot of people have this concept of what America means, or what Canada means, what it means to be, our country, or identify with our culture. They have this static image that they had when they were 6, and they die with it when they're 96. When, quite honestly, the reason a lot of older generations are disappointed with the younger people is because of how they've influenced this concept of culture that they have from when they were kids. Mm-hmm. When we were kids, we respected our parents. Well, actually, you didn't respect your parents any more than kids nowadays do. I promise you. Ask your parents.
Yeah.
Right? I don't think, and there might be some variation in there, but I don't believe it's nearly as strong as most people believe it is. Right, that's my thoughts.
Yeah, and just to take that even a little further, even around taking care of your parents, I think it was a culture for our generation before us would take, their parents probably had, and I think it's because I know from my mom, her experience was take care of your elders as you're older. Now they raised you. Now it's your turn to take care of them as they're in their old age, and that there's the expectation, because now we bring that word into the mix of, your kids to take care of you. But I always tried to tell my mom that I love that, that there is this closeness of family wanting to take care of each other. However, I always, whenever you would watch a movie, like I was always into those big Western, I was always into the old movies, like from the 30s, 40s. I mean, I was an old soul for a young kid, that's what I wanted to watch, the black and whites and everything. And so, and I remember saying to her, like, Mom, like way back in the day, let's talk about way back in the day, before there were cars, there were horse and carriage. In fact, to be a Canadian citizen. Oh, are you okay, Andy? I hope you're okay.
Yeah.
To be a Canadian citizen, you had to have a horse. Like that was one of the requirements to become a Canadian citizen way back when. And so, when I told my mom this, and I was saying, way back when, all there were horse and carriage. And so traveling around, and there were no planes. They were still working on boats, but I'm talking a few, like 100 and so such years ago. And they were traveling from, say, one continent to another. It would take them months to get there. Yes. There was no taking a flight. They weren't driving a car to drive from one state to another to meet up with their family members. If they got married, they moved away, and say maybe they moved from California all the way over across the country to New York. That's like months or days or whatever to travel by horse and carriage, by stagecoach.
By
And you might
train even.
not, or even train, and you might not see your family member for months, even years, maybe never if you die, right? And so I was trying to explain that to her. I said, I understand what you're saying, because I think she was angry in a way, because I decided, and I've always been this way, adventurous. I didn't want to just like stick around. I wasn't going to go by the social expectation of go to school, get a job, get married, have kids, stay at your
Stay home.
job, retire, and then live my life. That was never in my radar. It was never my plan. So living my life was important. And when I explained that to her, I said, it's not that I don't want to be around to take care of you, because what her idea was, Ray and I would get married, we would get a house, she would have an ensuite for the in-law, and we would take care of her, because she took care of her parents. I mean, not really so much my grandfather, because he was very independent, but she, took care of my grandmother, who I never met, but she took care of my grandmother as she had cancer, and she took care of her until she passed.
Right.
And so that was my mom's upbringing, I guess. She was made to believe that that's what you do. You take care of your elders. And so it was, I think, very hard for her to wrap around her head that things change. That might have been a trend. That might have been a cultural trend, generational trend. But I was breaking the norm, because I felt if people were writing stories or showing lifestyles where people did move away from each other. They didn't even have mail, might not get mail for 2 months or 3 months or a year.
Right.
How I needed her to understand, and I don't know if she does. I was trying to get her to understand that it wasn't because I didn't want to be with her, but I wanted to live my life. And so, yeah, so I was making my own trend. I decided my trend has always been, I live my life how I like to live my life. So if that means I'm living here, or I'm living somewhere else, or I live small, like I live tiny, or I decide that I want to follow a certain trend 5 years later, that's how I live. I don't follow because it's the expectation of society. So that, I mean, I wanted to share that, because I really thought, like a lot of our time, I find like there is that cultural or maybe generational expectation that is changing, because now, a lot of the culture, again, still, it used to be getting married, having a family, and settling down, having one person go to work and the wife stay at home. Now that's changed. Typically now people are going to having 2 income households. Sometimes they're not even having children. Sometimes they're only having one. And both are having careers and enjoying that life. So things change. And it's influencing the rest of the world.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. I agree that that's a trend. It's one of the longer trends. Like, it's not something that happened over the course of a year or two. It's something that's happening over generations. Mm-hmm. But it is still a trend. Like, we are trending towards independence because we can still interact with our family from around the world. Like, we don't have to stay within 5 miles of home to be able to see our family on a regular basis. I can see my family daily from virtually anywhere in the world. Not quite anywhere in the world, but virtually anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Right. And so therefore we want to expand that freedom and find other people that we share with, and other cultures, and experience new things, and we have that desire and craving. And again, it's become almost a trend. Well, I won't say almost. It has become a trend. That independence, that freedom has become a trend, and it's building more and more in our society. More and more people want that. And another trend is a version of that independence. If somebody thinks something's a trend, they'll trend away from it because they don't want to follow the trend. And that's another trend, a version of independence. That if they think something is common, they'll do something different because they don't want to do what's common. My version of that is living in my truck. There is a whole hashtag, a whole culture around van life, around people who take, vans and sometimes old buses, and they convert them into RVs, and they often do it all by hand, by themselves, or maybe with a couple of friends. They get together and they convert these things into wonderful little RVs that can contain their life, and they can go traveling for months or even years at a time. And that is the trend. And I want to buck that trend. I want to take a Chevy Avalanche, or even better, a Cadillac Escalade EXT, which is the Cadillac version of an Avalanche, and do the same thing. But I don't want to customize it myself. I want to take it to an RV shop and get them to do it professionally. And I want to drive around in a Cadillac, that is customized. I don't want to have a van life hippie kind of a van that's, all customized and it looks all pretty from the outside, but it still very much looks like it was customized. I want to have a Cadillac, and from the external, it'll look like a Cadillac. It might have a special paint job is the hardest thing it'll come by. But I do want to live like I do want the interior to be very, very customized to how I want to live. So that's again another version of bucking a trend, or causing a new trend, or even life coaching is a trend these days. More and more people are becoming coaches. More and more people are seeking coaches. More and more people are seeking alternative kinds of healthcare measures. You find more people going to a holistic medicine, or natural oils, and all kinds of things, because people are looking for solutions that are not what the system has told us we have to do.
Yeah.
And whether that's doctors and lawyers, or whether that's trends and fads, people are looking for a new way of doing things. We have a trend again, another trend towards uniqueness and freedom, and I want to be me, and I want you to be you, and I think that's one of the things that made us really attract to this channel, is because we're both very different people with similar values, and we've come from very different lifestyles, both as children and as adults. And yet there's still a lot of similarity in values there. So, let's explore some of that, and let's explore some of that in the context of expectations. Yeah. Like your family's expectation for you to take care of your elders. My family's expectation was similar. And when none of my mom's kids grew up with any kind of money or stability, she's like, okay, well, that ain't happening. So, she just kind of gave up on that idea because of the financial limitations of it. And none of us lived in a place that she could come live with us. And then, and so it's these kinds of expectations, the expectations that these trends, that these changes, that these evolutions of our society, of our cultures, it's those expectations that we're discovering in this conversation, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't mind trends, because I think, it helps us to evolve, like keeping an open mind for different things and just allowing ourselves to grow. But let's talk about fads for a bit, because there's a lot of fads that have come and gone, like hairstyle. Do you remember? Well, and I've seen this one come back and forth many times. It's not my favorite, but women would wear these, they call them culottes. So it's like the skirt, except you put a slit down and make it a pant leg, but it's like a skirt when you're standing. Not my favorite. But that's something that's come and gone many times. How about the shoulder pads? It keeps coming back and forth. That has been I think that's been a fad, but it's come and gone. You've got let's talk about what do they call it? The mullet. It keeps coming and going. It just different variations to make it look a little bit different. Is it because people in the fashion industry are having a lack of vision, so they go back through the time periods to see what they can, muster up again, but in a different way to make it seem a little bit more, trendy, more mainstream, but still has that flair of different. Because I've noticed that too. I used to follow fashion a lot. Not so much these days, just because I don't have the need to keep a full wardrobe of things like I used to. I was extremely fashionable. And then even with hairstyles, like again, I talk about the mullet, but then you've got the pixie cut that Mia Farrow first started way back in the 60s, and Twiggy back in
Yeah.
the 60s. And then all of a sudden it went away, but then came back again. And then variations of that with the shag. So I'm talking about just some trends, some fads that were sort of like trends, but they faded away very quickly.
Yeah.
And even toys, dances, things like that,
Yeah.
different food. Like I was just curious what. Let me see. They're talking about some fads. I'm doing a little bit of Google search while we're talking. And okay, so is reality TV a trend or is it a fad? Because it's trend. It seems to be that it's. I think myself personally, that reality TV has taken over. And the reason why I say that is that it used to be fictional TV shows that were the big thing. Like you were waiting for the next season of something. You couldn't wait for the next season of something. And now it's like it went from one reality TV show, which was a bunch of kids and that they did this experiment around living together in a house, to all of a sudden you could name it. If you can do it, it's going to be on a reality TV show, whether it's from knitting to, just like you think about it, like all of the reality TV, the Real Housewives, well, they're not I mean, come on now. They're Rich Housewives. So just call it Rich Housewives. Stop calling it Real Housewives. Um, or you get then you've got all of these things which I find interesting on History Channel. You got like the Pawn Stars and you've got like the Gold Rush, those types of things. There are some that are educational and interesting, but then you get a lot like the Kardashians and the Real Housewives and the just shows like that, Summer House, all of these. And I'm not saying anything negative about these people. I'm just saying that whatever in life, it could be that someone decides they're going to do a reality TV on people who have YouTube channels. I mean, they could. So that's what I'm just saying. And then people would watch it. It's like, what? So I feel like it was a trend. It started changing how society started watching television. And we're going to be talking about that too coming up at some point, right?
We will
That's
be.
why I'm segueing into this.
We will be.
But
Yeah.
but it really has, because I think everything that's on television now that you could watch, whether it's all of like the big shows are now moving to premium movie channels. Like HBO has all of these talk shows and movies and music and all of that stuff that you get on those premium channels. And regular cable has, you can, even some of those regular cable channels, you still have to pay a higher price if you want access to History Channel and things like Bravo. But your regular TV, then you get the news, and then you might get some of these other shows that are more based around reality. And so I think it went, like I said, what do they call it? They called it Real something way, way back. Remember in the 80s when they first came out with that reality show with the kids? Real
Yeah,
World.
I don't.
Real
Yeah,
World.
yeah.
That was the very first one. And then all of a sudden, and it kind of took off for a bit, and then you started seeing other ones, and it wasn't too big of a deal. But then all of a sudden, everything blew up. The Kardashians, I think, is probably one that really influenced reality TV. They really started saying, okay, we can start following around celebrities. So I brought this up just because some of these things that were fads, some of them that were trends, I think were more under the fad category because they fell away quickly.
Yeah.
But then you get some of these things that really are trends that are influencing culture. And so
a couple that I wanted to bring up are the Tide Pod challenge that went around. That was definitely a fad because it died real quick, as it should have, because it hurt people, right? And another one that was similar but much more beneficial was the ice bucket challenge, where people were dumping a bucket of ice water on themselves, but most of the time that was for charity.
Yeah.
So that was still a fad, as in people aren't dumping buckets of ice on themselves anymore. However, people are still doing challenges for charity. So in that sense, it became a trend, right? So a lot of those challenges going around Facebook, that was, itself was a trend or come back again. But that was something else that that was a trend or a fad, right? So that's a thought that I had on the subject too. Is there are just things that we did for a short period of time that we're not doing much anymore, that we really don't we did for a short time and they have influenced our culture. Like, you can bring up Tide Pods to just about anybody and they'll know what you're talking about. And you can bring, or those are more of the trends and the fads. So that's where I'm at. Yeah. Did I lose you there for a second? You froze for a second.
You froze for me, so I don't know.
Well, one of us was still live in the stream, and one of us was not, or maybe both of us weren't.
I don't know. So if it cut out, sorry guys. But one thing I do know is like that ice bucket challenge, I think was influenced a little bit by the polar bear challenge, where people would actually run into like like they would go into ice water, like an actual lake. That was a challenge, right? That was a thing that people do, I think, still every year.
Yeah, that was more of a trend or more of a cultural statement. Yeah. And then the ice bucket challenge evolved from that. I agree with you. That makes sense.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Well, we're coming to the top of the hour, so it was an interesting conversation. Like I said, I wasn't quite sure what to expect because, I'm a little outside of my comfort zone just because fads and trends for me have never been influential as far as like, am I going to jump on right now? Except only one have I done that. And I'm still on the fence on how I feel. And that's Clubhouse. It doesn't mean that I don't like it. I'm just not sure.
Yeah. And I don't think you jumped on that one necessarily because it was the fad. You just had this cool idea that you liked. And I think that's the difference is like you've said, you'll try something if it's something that's interesting to you. And it just so happened that you were interested when it was popular.
I just didn't do enough research. I'm still on the fence anyhow. But so our next, I'm looking forward to our next and last one of our, in this series for now, we're going to be talking about identities. I'm excited about that.
Yeah, identities. There can be a lot to be said about identities.
Yeah, because it's like, how are we influenced and how we see ourselves? It's all identity based. So I'm excited for that. So Andy, I am so excited. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I think we talked about a lot of things. I'm not sure if it helped anyone. I just know that it was an interesting conversation to have, just to talk about how our trends and our fads do influence us culturally. They influence, just communities. They influence, like I was saying, you could be in a specific community and this is the trend or this is something new that they expect everyone to adopt. And so it was interesting to talk about this. I'm going to let you close out our discussion tonight because I know you always have something awesome to say.
Well, I don't know how awesome it is, but I'll figure something out to say. I really enjoyed this conversation as well. Like you said, it was we brought up a lot of subjects and came at it from a lot of different directions, and not surprisingly, even though neither one of us really had a lot of confidence that we could really had something to say or something to contribute to the conversation, we managed somehow to still fill up an hour, and I have a lot of faith in us to be able to talk for an hour on these kinds of things. I really enjoy these conversations, and thank you for bringing it up, for your participation. I love these conversations. We can't have enough of them. I look forward to our next one. Identities is one that's especially close to my heart. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you again in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thanks very much for coming. We'll see you soon. And I am going to end broadcast. So bye for now.
Bye-bye.